in that case, we can begin. So if you guys were all here for the last one, I'm up for just carrying on the conversation. So who have we got? Is James there? Brilliant.
Here.
Hello. How are you?
How are you? Thanks for having me.
That's a pleasure. I don't know if you were just following the last panel we had. We were talking very much about the need for collaboration, cooperation between all the different stakeholders in sports betting. And you as legal counsel for Boston Celtics, huge organization, and obviously with the huge change you've just had, I believe Massachusetts is now sports betting is legal. I'd love to get your perspective.
Yeah, so just on that point, Massachusetts has legalized sports betting as of the end of July. The governor signed it into law shortly thereafter, and the regulator that's been tasked with overseeing sports betting is the Gaming Commission here in the state, and they're in the process of preparing those regulations, which will have a public comment period. And there are a number of potential operators that go through an application and vetting process. So it's not yet launched, but we anticipate it to be launched sometime within the next, call it 6 months. The commission's been a little bit hesitant to give a timeline.
And so how much conversation are you having with the other stakeholders? And how much of your day-to-day is that taking up at the moment?
Well, so I'm sure the group is familiar with PASPA and the Supreme Court striking that down in 2018. So we spent the past several years spending a lot of time working with our legislators here in the state to help understand league policies, understand things that we were concerned about, primarily the fact that sports betting was happening in an unauthorized format through offshore mobile accounts, things like that, operators that, of course, were not legal and authorized in the state. So that was a concerted, consistent effort. At times, it included other local teams, their respective leagues, and it was really an ongoing educational process. Now that it's legalized here and we're awaiting the regulations, we've taken a bit of a step back, but we anticipate working with the operators that eventually are authorized in perhaps a sponsorship or marketing capacity.
Okay, very interesting. Ruti, I want to turn to you. We spoke the other day, and you said to me that is it 2% of the whole volume of betting on Spanish games in Brazil? Yes, Portugal. I forget which country I'm in. Only 2% of those bets are actually placed in Portugal, and 98% are outside. So you have to be talking to people outside your home market, which must be complicated.
Yes. First of all, let me thank SIGA for the invitation and for the work that you've been doing in this particular matter. Regarding that, okay, we have a study. It was provided us by SportRadar, that is the company that has Star Lizard, that was here in the last panel, monitors what is happening in the betting market in Portuguese competitions. So in accordance with that study, with 80%, okay, of the value betted on Portuguese competitions was happened in the Asian market, and only 2% was bet in Portugal. Okay, well, this depends in what competition are we talking about, but if we look at the professional competitions, we can conclude this. And that is why, of course, we need to cooperate with other parties, not only in Portugal, but also outside our country. It was told this is a huge phenomenon all over the world that happens in every sport, so we cannot deal with this alone.
Thank you very much for that. Ian, what's your view on cooperation? Good thing, no doubt.
Hello? Oh, sorry, great. Undoubtedly, and cooperation across multi-stakeholder forums SIGA is a great starting point for that, but globally there's a long way to go. And I think one of the things that came out of the last panel, and people have danced around, because we like to be polite and politically correct, which is not a quality I embody very well. If we could eliminate illegal and match-fixing related activities in mainland China, we would eliminate 85% of match-fixing worldwide. So cooperation, yes, but it's got to be targeted where it's going to be most effective. And if you include Russia and CIS in that, we'll get rid of 95%. And that's just the reality. That's not a political statement, it's just the truth. And until we face that as a global betting industry, those of us on the match-fixing, anti-match-fixing, anti-corruption side, the operators, the sports, everybody, yes, we need to cooperate. Yes, we need better global regulation. We need better, the point made earlier by Matt, I think, better enforcement. God, enforcement is just garbage. We've got laws, but we've got no enforcement. There's about 7 jurisdictions in the world that have reasonable enforcement. But until you do those things, and until you acknowledge that as a global industry, whichever side of it you're on, you can persuade the Chinese government to do something about it. You're never going to persuade the Russian government, so forget that one. It's a kleptocracy. But if you could persuade the Chinese to make effective enforcement on illegal gambling and match-fixing by the triads and syndicates in China, we'll have gone a hell of a long way to solving this problem. That's my view. Cooperation, yes, but let's target it where it's going to be most effective.
It's very interesting that it seems to be so focused on one problem. And have you flown over today?
Hello, I'm Anna Barbara from Galera Bet. I'm the legal counsel and the governmental relation that Ricardo mentioned. I would like just to continue with this. This weekend, of course, you do not know, one of the major magazines in Brazil, is Veja, reported a match fixing from the Asian market in a Brazilian match, like a very minor, and it's a scandal this week in Brazil. So it's really, the Asian is our problem. The problem with match fixing and the bets coming from that are not locally, but from the Asian market and the Russian market, as you both so perfectly pointed out. And just to talk a little bit about Brazil, since 2018, Brazil has a law, sports betting is legalized in Brazil, but we do not have the decree of bureaucratic Latin American countries that we do not have a Brazilian license, but foreign companies with license are allowed to announce and to operate in the Brazilian market from abroad. As Ricardo mentioned, we are joint ventured with Playtech. We are powered with their technology. All our operations is from abroad, is from Europe. And we, as a bet operator in Brazil, are facing a lot of problems because our costs, our compliance, we are competitive, but not as competitive. But we do believe that it's important, and we are in a lot of talks with the government, with the agents. I've worked for the Brazilian government for 5 years in the past. And we are trying to point out what is important to assure that we are going to have a healthy and sustainable market and industry. And integrity is for sure one of the main issues. Regarding match fixing, we are discussing with the Federação Paulista de Futebol, that's here also in the event, how can we sponsor an initiative regarding education? A bottom-up education with the lower athletes, as I don't know, somebody here mentioned about the athletes of the university in America. We have in Brazil, but not university students, but low-class people that try to see in the sports a way to get a better income and to have a life. And we are very, very focused on sponsoring and promoting these sort of initiatives. Currently, Galera we are sponsoring the Brazilian Federation, Brazilian Confederation, Brazil Football Confederation. We are sponsoring the Basketball Confederation. We are one of the first of the Brazilian bets to sponsor women squads like Corinthians squads. And we are also initiating a diversity activity, sponsoring LGBTQ fan clubs. It's very interesting. We were the first brand in Brazil to sponsor the fan clubs regarding trying to send a message of peace, not violence. And we think it's everything very important to assure this future for our industry.
So taking from that, education was one of the things you mentioned there, and I think education, people talk about education constantly in this, and I'd like to get everyone's view on education. Actually, starting with Boston Celtics, how much are you now putting into educating your athletes? And all the way through, because, the younger athletes, they need, as soon as they start playing, it should be there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so as I mentioned briefly earlier, the league has a pretty robust set of rules around sports betting, primarily prohibiting betting on NBA games and events, and that extends to the affiliated leagues, the WNBA, the 2K League, and the G League, as well as events like you cannot place a bet on who's going to be drafted first in the upcoming NBA draft, for example. So those apply to everyone who works for an NBA team, the league itself, whether or not they're full-time employees. And we spend, there are multiple touch points at each season. We of course train the players, but it's much broader than that. And so as team integrity officer, I spend a lot of time working with all of our staff, everyone else who works for the team, to understand these rules in detail. And it's a really important process as you're noting, to educate everyone on this, because some of it can be nuanced. The no betting prohibition is fairly straightforward, but fixing and tipping, safeguarding sensitive information that could affect an outcome in a game, things like that are so important to continue to educate everyone involved.
Right. Ruti, what's the perspective of an FA?
Get this opportunity to answer here to my colleague that when I talked about cooperation, it would need it to be with the good guys. Okay, so education for us is what is in our power to do. Okay, so of course we are talking about 80% maybe in Asia, 2% in Portugal, and the rest of the bets all over the world. But to have a match fixing case, we need to have a player or a referee in the pitch doing something. So we have a job to do. As any national association, their objective is to teach players to play football and organize competitions and national teams, correct? But we need to transmit some values to the participants, okay? Since 2017, mostly, we had these education sessions already to the national teams, but since 2017, we start going to clubs presently. Let me tell you that from 2017 to now, we made more than 45,000 sessions to players, referees, managers, coaches, explaining them this phenomenon, what is behind all of this, how can they be approached, what can happen to them, explaining them that this is not a problem of football or futsal or women or men, this can happen everywhere. It's not even their exactly fault. Sometimes they don't exactly understand the dimension of this, okay? Because they think that, I don't have nothing to lose and my team doesn't have anything to lose as well. Of course, we're talking about values, and sometimes these players, they just say no because, no, I'm not doing this to my team, or I'm not betting in my own competition. In Portugal, it's a crime to bet in your own competition. So, of course, we need to cooperate with the good guys, and what I meant by this is that, okay, we need to educate, but for investigation, we need to cooperate with the police, with the licensed betting companies here, because we know that we have a big, big problem with the illegal betting market. But for that, Ricardo was here already talking a little bit about this. So each person does what has in their power to do. And for us, education is our main pillar. Yes.
Yeah, I agree. Education is probably one of the greatest deterrents for the people who actually have to do the match fixing. But it has to be in cooperation with all the other measures that have been discussed in the previous panel and now. And this is particularly for when you look at your demographic that we do have control over, being primarily the participants, you've got that typical sort of 80-20-20 principle where 20 of them are never going to match fix in a million years. You could offer them anything and they're not going to do it. You've got 20% who will, regardless, right? Just they're going to do it. They're immoral, amoral. It's the 60% in the middle that we're really concerned about, because we want those who make a risk assessment to be persuaded that it's the right thing to do to not match fix, as well as persuade them that they're going to get caught if they do. And that's the overlap here. So education is vital, but it's got to link to a meaningful, that what are you educating them about, which is the rules and all of that. But you're hoping that what you're persuading them is that if they do match fix, they're going to get caught. So you've got to have the they're going to get caught part right. And that's where the sports governing bodies, the rules, the law enforcement, the data companies, the betting companies all have to work together to make sure that that's a proper threat and not just something we say. And increasingly, in many instances, the players know that that's a kind of I'll take my chances, because the chances of getting caught are slim. And we've got to make sure that they are not slim, that you're probably going to get caught. And that's where the work needs to be done. But education, of course, it's essential.
Is there any sort of global standard on education, or does everyone just kind of come up with their own, this is how we're going to do it? That might be one for you, actually, Ruti. Yeah.
In Portugal, the law, we have a law that applies to us and tells us more or less the topics that should be mentioned, okay? But of course, this is common sense, because you need to think as an athlete or as a referee, what do you need to know? What do you need to know to don't intervene in this, okay? So you do these sessions, but you also do awareness campaigns, trying to sensibilize to the problem, to what happens to sport. Of course, if we know in advance what is happening in this football match, any fan will gonna go watch it. Would any betting company would want it to put it in the market? Would any television would like to see it? That sport is the end of the credibility. So we need to try to spread the message, and sometimes this may not be really easy to do, because of course, if they don't have values, they will say, I'll take my chances, so.
Yeah, of course.
That's another question.
One point very important, education is of course the primary step, but how to get caught, how to make the people that do that, of course we depend on the police. What the operators, and I would like to point out something that Ricardo Dominguez mentioned very well, the know your client. What we as operator in a coalition can do, we have to map our clients. We have to find out who makes money with that sort of stuff. I will give you a testimonial here. We are facing a lot of problems with our onboarding, because we do have a lot of frictions with our clients, because we ask a lot of things, because we really want and need to know who is betting our platform. Our competitor does not do that because we lack regulation. But it's very important, and something that Mr. Ricardo Dominguez, I'm very proud, and I would like to discuss with him further, how we can do onboarding that is less friction, but assure us who is the one that is really making money, laundering money, and violating and attacking the credibility and the credibility of our industry and of the sport.
Right. Oh, okay. Have we still got time? 3 minutes. Okay. Right. So I would. It's a final comment from everyone time. Yeah. Should we go for that? Or have you got? What's that? Yeah.
Oh, I'd love to. I always have more than one. I think that in the absence of any kind of obvious global forum specialized on this issue, SIGA has taken on the role, and I think that's vital. It's been an area of focus more or less from day one, and that's incredibly important because it sits at the heart of integrity. We all know that if people lose faith in what they're watching on the field or the pitch, that it isn't a genuine competition between two people or two teams desperately doing their best to win, we lose the heart of our product. And that's not simply a question of the Corinthian ideals of sport. It's actually, of course, a question of where sport sits in the panoply of entertainment that we have at our disposal these days. And I'll come back to my current role, which is within esports. And one of the great difficulties that we face there is that in the absence of a global governing body of any significance, because we're dealing with a bunch of verticals, not one thing, the thing that I found that most distinguishes it is that in traditional sport, people with talent are identified within the sport these days very young, 10, 11, 12, and they're put into a system where they know from a very early age that there are rules that govern their behavior off the pitch, anti-doping, what they can say publicly, Twitter, social media, anti-corruption, and rules about betting. In esports, there's a strange environment where you can go from being very good at a video game in your mom's basement to being a $100,000 a year professional in 6 months. And you have no idea that there are rules that govern your life off the game server. And so we have a special challenge where we need the help of the broader traditional sports community in professionalizing and regularizing the practice of esports. And so, my appeal really in this context of betting integrity is, can we start talking about incorporating people's thoughts on esports into their thoughts on sports betting more than they're currently doing? And in particular in the United States, this is an absolute nightmare because we're dealing with, since the repeal of PASPA, and our colleague from the Celtics will know this, that instead of there being one overarching sports betting regulation in the United States, we're going to end up with about 150 because we've got 50 states and about 120 tribal authorities, each one of whom is creating their own set of sports betting regulations. And any of us outside that system know that that's madness. But that's how it is. That's how it is. We have to deal with the reality. And in that regard, we need traditional sports. We in esports need traditional sports help. And I would call for more cooperation. And I see SIGA as the only obvious forum for that, to be honest. It's the only place.
Thank you very much for that. And thank you to SIGA. And yeah. Okay, and I was going to take that to James. I just have no idea what the time is now. So James, what did you say? 100 all the states and 150 tribal councils. That sounds like, for a lawyer, that must be a fun time.
Well, yeah, that does sound a bit overwhelming. First of all, I agree with the previous comments, and just to note, more than half of the states have authorized sports betting or legalized sports betting at this point, but there are still some that have not. So the result is that you can't place a legal sports bet in those jurisdictions. But I think from my perspective, it really puts a lot of emphasis on the league to do a good job of communicating its policies. And I think the enforcement comments we were talking about earlier are really important as well. So one of the things we emphasize is if you do engage in anything that is not in compliance with our sports betting policies as a league, you could face a lifetime ban, no longer be able to be associated with the league or any of its teams. So I think that is a very substantial enforcement mechanism that sort of, sits on top of any applicable jurisdictions, laws, or regulations. So that's the way that we've approached it. Certainly, want to ensure that our local laws are as robust as possible. And that was what a lot of the work we did over the past few years, on the lobbying efforts with the legislators focused on. But I think ultimately it's so important that the league, not just the NBA and its associated leagues, but all leagues have a very, robust set of policies and enforcement mechanisms.
Yeah, and robust policies. Maybe that's the topic to end on. Robust policies, though, what we need, and cooperation. Thank you to everyone on the panel.